Yes.
Sketch.
You're gonna throw it and get back to me.
Use that.
Hey, I'm not dealing with you guys dealing hand sanitizer around the room, okay? Yeah, that's what it's like. You guys are spreading it around to each person. Everybody wants some. Cool. I understand, but you also were a part of the problem. You can just bring them out and throw them at everybody. So don't do that. Alright guys, so what does somebody think? So the first one, so we're talking about what's the role of a journalist today? What's somebody write down? Go ahead, Adam.
To write news and articles about the news and like what's happening in the world.
Okay, yeah, so what kinds do you think? Like
you can have like sports journalists write about what's happening in sports, you can have other journalists like that.
okay. So do you think that they should only report on what they're qualified to?
Yes.
There are people, so it's like an opinionated, there's bias, like there are teams who like every sports team, for example, there's gonna be like Jacksonville Jaguar writers for the team. They're not gonna trash the Jaguars for being not good.
They're the best team in the NFL.
I don't know if they're the best, but sure. But you get what I'm saying, like they could write about other NFL teams, well like when they write about the Jaguars, they're obviously gonna like probably write positive things. They're not gonna like just crap all over them and say, like, oh, they're not good. Huh?
Not really truthful.
Well, it'll just be a bias. That's what we talked about. But like, I mean, you guys, I mean, with like technology in today's day and age, like, you guys can go out and be reporters if you want, and like just like take a video and be like, oh, this is what I said. This is you can make your own blog and then be your own reporter for whatever you want. Like, that's just how much it is today. So, talking about, so it says you feel that journalists are in a position of exposing the problems that are facing society. Do you think that's part of what they do?
Yeah.
Some of them don't, some of them do. And that's what we're talking about. That's like the whole thing, like with how we had the Jacob Reese activity the other day. We were talking about it. So he obviously took pictures of the people living in the tenements and the horrible conditions that they lived in. And then he exposed, he like shared it with the world. He exposed it, people saw it, and then a lot of change came with that. And like that happens like still today. Like you see pictures and you're just like, if you see a picture of maybe a young child struggling, or like if there's a picture, post like pictures from like when the hurricane hit Houston and then the other one hit Puerto Rico earlier this year, well last fall. But when that happened, like people threw pictures out on the internet, and then people saw it. It was like, oh my God, they need to help. And they, like things like there's a lot of donations, a lot of like sending aid, foreign aid, help like that. But that's kind of part of what a journalist is supposed to do. And then so we talked about, so what are your feelings about journalists using unnamed sources? Do you think that that's okay?
Yeah.
It does depend. That's, I mean, I get it. It depends. Like you guys say, like each situation is different. Depends on what's at stake here or there. Yes, Isaiah.
I think it like they could have a credible source, but like them not naming that source could make people see like their story or something differently, like they're not trusted or something.
Yeah, no, that's totally fair. Like, you can have an unnamed source that can be credible, but some people might not think it's credible because it's an unnamed source. Like, oh, maybe it's just a random person who's saying this,
Or it's you yourself that's saying it.
yeah, and you can just pretend it's not you. There's things like that. I mean, there's also like there's stuff at risk here or there, like depending on who says something. I'll tell you guys just a little quick story. I was in 5th grade. There was a letter in the newspaper written about my school principal.
Somebody has a call.
Yeah, just leave it, whoever it is. I think it might be Mr. Nipson's desk, but that's okay. So, my school principal, it's a she, not a he. She was at a article written in the paper about her. Wasn't too nice. The headline went something along the lines of, don't poke Mama Bear because then she turns into the grizzly. And so the principal, like, I didn't know a lot when I was like that young, but apparently she was like kind of harsh and she was strict with like the students and everything. she would like scream at them if they misbehaved or didn't like do the right thing. And we were talking about elementary kids here, like third graders or second graders, and she would like scream and like make them cry, things like that. And she'd be like, I'm just trying to like get them to grow up, things like that. So that article was written. There were some teachers who was like, oh, anonymous source here or there. My teacher in my 5th grade year, she put her name in the paper and she said things along the lines. She was like, oh, I don't like the way she does things. She was like, I don't agree with what she does. You got here and this.
She lost a job.
She had her contract terminated at the end of the year. So like she like was gonna finish off the year, but like she knew like halfway through her year that she was done. So that's part of the reason that people stay unnamed. But sometimes people want to be named because they want to be like, you want to be known that you stood up for what you believed in, or you stood up for the students, or you stood up for these other people. Does that make sense?
Yeah, they're willing to take a risk.
They're willing to take a risk, exactly. And so like, I mean, if it comes to a situation where you guys are, one day you're at a job, or you hate your boss, or something happened and you feel like you've been treated unfairly. And let's say it's like a whole thing, like they come to you and like reporter comes to you and asks you about whatever's been going on. Would you give them your name or would you not? Like, I understand it's different in every case, but sometimes people don't want to risk losing their job or being in the public eye, so they'll be the anonymous or unnamed source. What do you guys think? Do you guys think you would want to be anonymous? Or you guys think you'd put your name out there?
It would depend on what's going on.
No, I get that. I mean, that's fine. Yeah. If it's a dumb job that you're working right now or something, like, not the end of the world, but if it's like 15 years from now and you guys are like, you have a family and you have like a corporate job, you don't want to possibly risk losing that. I get that. But that's what we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about journalists and we're going to talk about muckrakers today. So we talked about him, but with Reese, he was a muckraker. So there's a definition on the handout that I'm giving to you guys, but basically, so they were the journalists who exposed the problems with society during that time, during the early 1800s, 1900s. That's about it. What? I know they're all right, so it said, so the second part right there, so it's 2.3 with muckraking. So writer, the journalist who exposes problems of society in order to bring about reform. So, talking about that, here's a few of the famous ones. We're going to talk about several of the famous ones today, what they did and why. So this is Lincoln Stevens. He wrote this book. It was called The Shame of Cities. The Shame of Cities. So it was a book, but it was also like a collection of articles that he wrote about. You guys remember, so we talked about political machines and Tammany Hall. We talked about the big boss Tweed and how he took advantage of the political system in New York City. So that was just like one of the big guys that we talked about, but this happened all over the world, all over the country. So you have the Shame of Cities. So Stevens, he came about, he exposed a lot of other cities who were doing this. Philadelphia was a big one, but he also had stops in St. Louis and Virginia, cities in Virginia as well. He went through, he talked about how the mayor was getting money from the big oil company to or he was getting money from the big construction company, one of these two giant industries. So we talked also about Reese. So Reese was a photographer who published the set of photos. So we talked about how the other half lives. So it was all about the tenements, the living conditions of a lot of poor working class people. Many of them were immigrants. So you guys remember at least some of those pictures that we saw, but some of them were a couple more here. So you have this is just in one of the mines. This looks like an adult, at least in the front, but you can tell right behind him it's definitely a child, the young boy, and the one after here. So you see, so these kids are obviously, I mean the black and white obviously makes it like look a little bit darker than it is, but these kids are sitting there, they probably just came out of the mine, they're covered in soot or dirt, and they obviously don't have like happy smiles on their face. They're just sitting there with like a blank stare. Probably something along the lines of what you guys are looking at me right now when you're just like, get me out of here. I get it. Here's another one, so they're all sitting down at their sewing machines. Some of the other famous people, muckrakers. So we have Ida Tarbell. So Ida Tarbell wrote the History of Standard Oil. This was a set of books that took down Rockefeller to an extent because of how big of a robber baron he was and the practices of which he went through, where he would buy out political parties or congressmen and say, if you don't give me money, then I'm not going to support you. And if you didn't have his support, you weren't probably going to be able to get elected. But she was a very loud-spoken, antitrust, anti-monopoly woman. And the History of Standard Oil, eventually, with this being read, it eventually led to its breakup. And they made Rockefeller sell, they split Rockefeller's company from like one giant oil company to like 30. And some of them are still around today. BP and Exxon were originally part of Standard Oil 150 years ago, 125 years ago. But imagine if every single gas station was under one, and that's what you had with Rockefeller back then. So this is John Spargo. His claim to fame was his book about child labor laws and the problems that he experienced with them. And it's called A Bitter Cry of the Children. And so he obviously saying the bitter cry, I mean, he's making it well known that he obviously is against child labor, but with the title, The Bitter Cry, he's appealing to their emotional side. He's making them feel bad. He's talking about how, I mean, if you hear the phrase "a bitter cry" from a child, you're probably going to be upset. You're probably going to not like what's going to come next. So here's this picture. So can somebody read the caption for this political cartoon for me? Thank you, Kevin.
Washington as seen by the trust. What a funny little government John D. Rockefeller observes in this
Satirical
cartoon. His own wealth and power are presumed to dwarf the resources of the federal government.
Thank you. All right, so this is just what the cartoon describes, but you see, so he's got his monocle on, he's looking very intently. What's he looking at? What's in his hand? The White House. He's looking at the White House, and the president's underneath there with several big bags of money. And then in the distance you see, down right here, so you have a couple oil refineries, and then you see the Capitol building and Congress with smokestacks coming out and them pouring out the smoke from the oil refinery. Basically saying that Congress was another oil refinery for Rockefeller because he controlled most of it. And that's the idea of this cartoon. But so this was another cartoon that was made famous that helped take down